Okay, guys, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Okay, so this is the How to Give an Oral Research Presentation, and it's hosted by both BURST and BMSA. So if you're in either of those organizations, you can get points for tonight's event. And thank you guys again for being here. Like I said, appreciate it. And I'm not gonna do the presenter mode today because I need to go back and forth between screens. So we're just gonna keep it like this. And also, I just want this workshop to be interactive. So if you guys have questions about anything like I say, just feel free to interrupt me at any point and ask your question or put it in the chat, and I'll see it. Okay. So first, I just wanted to touch on the importance of scientific communication and why you should even care about, how to give an oral research presentation. Well, honestly, half of science is just communication. So if you work in a lab and you do research and you work on a project, like that's half of the battle. But after you do that work, if you're not able to effectively communicate what you did and tell other scientists and like other people around you what you did and how you did it, well then is anyone even going to know like what you did, and be able to like recognize what you did if you can't even effectively talk about it? So it's a really important skill, to have, especially if you're in research. And as a researcher, you guys are going to have to give presentations, for so many different things, whether that's like in your class in a lab, for group meeting if you are in a research lab, for conferences like the Heart of Texas Conference, as well as Ursa Scholars Week, hosted by Baylor. So being an effective communicator not only adds to your skills, but if you decide to present at research conferences and competitions, the better your presentation is, the better you set yourself up for getting things like awards and recognition, that you can add to your resume, and that really helps you stand out. Okay, so first I want to start with just talking about the content that your research presentation should include. So I would suggest you follow like your typical research article flow. Think about what your abstract has, and just kind of follow that like general idea. So just like when you read any research article, it always starts with an introduction. So just follow that same format. Start out with an introduction, a general review of the concepts in your field, your problem, whatever that is, and then go into your theoretical framework or your research question. So if it's like a very specific question that you were researching in your project, then go ahead and put that out there. Then you want to transition into your methods, like what instruments did you use, techniques, all of that. It's not super important to spend a lot of time on this, but it is important to lay the groundwork of what you did so people like have some context to what you're doing. And then you can also do more like background literature review if some of the things that you're talking about are really complex, or like some of the instruments or techniques that you talked about you don't think the audience knows. You can always go more in depth on any of the topics if needed. And then you want to go into like your discussion and your results section. And this is going to be the bulk of your presentation. I would say like make sure most of your slides are centered around your results and your discussion. So things like figures, graphs, charts, because that's really what research is about, are your results and like what did you actually discover. So most of the time you're going to be talking about those things. And then towards the end of the presentation, you want to wrap everything up, conclude, kind of restate what you talked about, what were your findings, just wrap it all up. And then the last 3 bullet points are recommendations. You don't necessarily need, future directions you don't necessarily need, but acknowledgments and references you definitely need. So future directions would be like, if you were presenting on a project that was still happening, like it hadn't finished yet, then you would, mention like where that project is headed. Or if you're starting a new project in the future related to your presentation, then definitely highlight that. And then acknowledgments, you always want to thank like the people who helped you, whether if you're in a research lab, so thank, your grad students, your PI. If it was for a class, like any of the students, or if the teacher helped you, make your presentation, just acknowledge them. It's always a really nice gesture. And then lastly, references. So you want to be credible. You want to make sure you have credible sources that people want to see your references. And so there's two ways you can do this. You can just add your references at the very end of your PowerPoint, which is fine. Or what I personally prefer to do is just add references on each slide. Like if I have an image or a figure, just put that at the very bottom of that slide. And then I'm like saving a slide and I'm still, citing stuff. So it's just up to you. So with all of that, here are some things I would suggest you guys keep in mind. So think about the order of your slides very carefully. Yes, like you want to follow the general order of a research article, but also remember, like, this is a project, it's not an article. So, like there was a start to your project, there was a middle, and then there was an end. So kind of think about it from a story narrative instead of like a hard written research article point of view. I think if you think about it like that, it'll help you like talk about it better and it'll help the flow of your presentation. So this is just a guideline, but of course you can change things around and reorder your slides depending on what makes sense for your presentation. And then also a key thing is to think about topic transitions. So you don't want to just go like from one topic to the next and it be very disconnected or like you're just switching gears completely, because that is going to like draw attention in a negative way. You want it to be seamless. So think about when you start a new slide, think about what you ended with on the last slide and how you can connect that information to the next slide, because that'll also help you put your slides in the order that makes the most sense. So usually when I'm making presentations and I'm thinking about like what I want to say, usually like at the very end of a slide, I will like put in a line about what I'm going to say in the next slide, here's some information and I'll elaborate on this point in the next slide or something like that, just so there's a transition. Okay, so now I have a few slides that are just examples of like the content I've been talking about and like what the references look like and maybe how to title your slides. So these few examples are in like your research article format, like flow. So you start off with some general concepts, and you'll notice that I have a reference at the very bottom of the slide, and this just refers to this image that I use. So I'll talk more about this later, but you have to cite everything, especially in a research presentation. That includes figures and pictures. And then you go into methodology, and then conclusions, applications. So instead of doing future directions, you could do an applications slide, just whatever makes sense for your presentation. You could also have both. You could have applications as well as future directions. And then here's what it looks like for the references to just be at the end. If you do this, then you don't need to cite on every specific slide. You can just wait till the end. But do make sure that your references are consistent in their look. I know a lot of people like just copy and paste their references, and they all look very different. So just make sure you give them a consistent look. And then acknowledgements. This can be as like simple or as extra as you want. You definitely want to list the names of everyone who helped you, but if you want to do pictures, I've seen that done as well. So it's just up to you, but make sure to include those. Okay, and then I also included some optional content that you can add on to your presentation if you want. So one thing is to have some extra slides at the very end of your presentation in case you get questions about those. So usually most presentations are timed, like you have a time limit. And so you obviously like decide, okay, here are the slides that I can include, but here are the ones that maybe you used in a previous presentation, but you don't have the time to talk about them in your presentation. So when that happens, I like to just put them at the very end of my presentation. So in case like a judge or someone asks me a question that I know relates to a slide that I already have made, then I can just pull up that slide and like use that visual to answer that question. It just shows you're well prepared, like you've thought about potential questions that you might get asked. And while you're like trying to decide what slides to include or not, if you have one of those extra slides, but you get asked a lot of questions about them, it might be worthwhile to consider if you should actually put that slide as part of your actual presentation instead of it just being an extra slide. Because usually if people are asking questions about it, like in every presentation you do, then it's probably crucial information that you don't want to just leave as like extra information. And then the other thing is slide numbers. I think this is really professional. So I honestly would recommend like everyone getting in the habit of doing them. It helps you because like if you're trying to like remember where you are in terms of time or just like how many slides you have left, if you know the number of your slides, that helps you. But also it helps the audience. Like if I'm listening to a presentation and like I see something on slide number 3 that I have a question about, well, usually you wait till the end to ask questions. So then I can tell the presenter like, hey, like I had a question about slide number 3, can you go to it? So it looks professional and it saves time. So just get in the habit of doing them. Okay, so let me show you guys an example of what I was talking about. So this is a presentation I did a few years ago. So I had like all of my regular slides, I had my title and everything, and then acknowledgements and questions. And then all of these slides after questions were just extra slides that I had made for like other presentations, or I thought I was going to use for this one, but didn't end up using it. So I just have them here in case I get asked a question about them. They are here for me to use. Okay, so the next thing I kind of want to talk about is design. And a lot of people like to overlook design because they don't think it's that crucial. But honestly, I think it's pretty important because if your presentation is not visually appealing or it doesn't make the audience like actually want to read it and look at it, then no one's like really listening to you. So if you have the time and like you want to go the extra mile and really want to make sure your presentation is appealing so that people want to listen to you, then I would definitely recommend following these tips and tricks. So mainly what I want to get across is whatever you decide, just make sure you choose a simple professional format design and be consistent. Like choose a theme or choose a template and stick with it. That includes like choosing a font and a text size and just using that uniformly across your presentation. You might not think anyone would notice or like it doesn't matter, but people do notice. And especially now with virtual presentations on Zoom, I think it just amplifies everything. So like usually in the past, when you give a presentation in person, like the projected slide is usually kind of far away. So people might not always notice all of your mistakes or like little inconsistencies, but over Zoom, the slideshow is like right in front of you. So you're going to be able to see everything and really notice those mistakes and things stand out. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so with text, what I have noticed is that less is always more. You don't want to put a lot of text or a lot of facts in your slides. Instead, make sure that you say those things because you want people to listen to you more than they're reading your presentation, right? So if you're saying all the important parts, then they're not looking at the presentation to figure out what the important things are. So if you use text, I would just say key points only. And remember with presentations, like you don't need to use complete sentences. You can use phrases, keywords, just the bare minimum that is concise and gets the point across that you think is the most important part of your slide. So instead of using text to lead your presentation and guide your presentation, use figures instead to guide your narrative, because the figures are, I guess like the heart of any like research article or research presentation, like I was talking about earlier, results section. So you want people to be looking at those and listening to you while you explain those figures, not reading the text about those figures. And then also another thing about text, nothing takes away from your credibility like spelling and grammar mistakes. Like I said earlier, this is amplified over Zoom. So just make sure that you or someone else has proofread your presentation, because there's honestly no excuse for spelling and grammar mistakes. It just boils down to the fact that you weren't prepared, or you didn't care enough to look over your presentation and find those mistakes. So just make sure you look for them beforehand. Okay, so then figures and pictures. So these are really, really important because they're going to make up the bulk of your presentation. Be very careful about like the figures and the pictures that you use, because you have limited space, you have limited time. So don't waste your time talking about figures or pictures that are irrelevant or are not going to support like your overall goal or your overall project. So only use pictures that enhance meaning of what you're trying to explain. And then, like I said earlier, make sure to cite all of your pictures. So if you're using a figure that came from a research article, cite that article. If you found a picture on Google, like that's fine, but you have to cite your source. And then this next thing is definitely something extra. Like if you have the time to go to the extra mile and you really want a consistent look, then you can do this, but it's by no means a requirement. But what has really helped me in the past to do is to recreate or redraw some charts and graphs in like a different format that's more cohesive to my presentation format. And I have some examples of this to kind of illustrate my point. But yes, I'll just wait to explain it there then. And there are some free software programs and platforms that you can use to recreate graphs or tables or whatever. So you don't have to spend money doing this. Personally, I use Inkscape for everything. It's free. You just download it. It's kind of like the Paint app on your computer, but like way more complex and has more features. If you have an iPad or you draw on Apple products, I've heard Procreate is a really good app. I personally don't use it, but definitely look into it if you're looking for something to recreate your charts and figures. And then the last point with design is effects. So I know like transitions and animations might look really cool, but if used carelessly and if used too much, then they really take away from the meaning and understanding of your presentation. So keep them at a minimum. I do think that if used sparingly and effectively, that they can help like illustrate your concepts that you're talking about. So you can use them to highlight like certain points or emphasize pictures, but just don't overdo it. Okay, so now I have some example slides to kind of illustrate what I was just talking about. So here, this is just a title slide that I used for a presentation a few years ago. It's pretty simple. Like when I say you need a professional design or professional format, it doesn't mean like you need something that looks like it was done by a professional. Like this is just a white background and very like minimal colors. So it doesn't have to be like super fancy or super flashy. Honestly, I think the simpler it is, the better it is. Yeah, and so with this title slide, it just has the essential information like your title, your name, the date if you want. And then I added this figure because it has to do with the name of my presentation, but you really don't need much besides that on your title slide. So these next few slides just illustrate some slides that I used that in a presentation. So the point with this is you'll notice that almost everything on the slide is a figure. Like I have very, very minimal text. So everything, like all the information I'm saying, like I'm telling the audience, they're not able to read it from my slides. That kind of forces them to pay attention, because if they're looking at the figure, like they're not going to have any idea what it means unless they're listening to me explain it to them. Here I have a scheme, and the scheme happens to have, text in it. So that's maybe like one way. If you want to incorporate text, maybe try incorporating text into a figure. But I would try to stay away from just having like a paragraph or just bullet points on a slide, because you can better arrange that information in a different way that will help support your meaning. Again, here, there's just graphs. Honestly, most of my slides are just figures and no text. Okay, with this slide, I wanted to show you an example of like an original figure versus a recreated or redrawn figure. So this figure was in an article that my lab published, and like this is a pretty good one. Like it's done very well. But now compare it to this figure, which is like honestly the same. So you're looking at a zoom in of this VUV region, but you'll notice like recreated, one, it has more color and it's, animated. It has more details, and it illustrates a lot of the things that you wouldn't really understand if you were looking at the previous one. So it just like adds more meaning to what you're trying to convey. And I believe this figure was made in Inkscape, and then this one was actually made in PowerPoint. So I'll talk about that later, but PowerPoint has a lot of tools that you can use to recreate figures, like if you don't want to download a software program or something like that. Here's another version of like that same figure, but redrawn in a different way to highlight like a different piece of information. The thing with figures is if you find a figure on Google or like in a research article that you think is good, but you wish it had like a different element or like a different piece of information, well, you're not stuck with it. You can edit it, you can make it your own, you can recreate it so that it conveys exactly what you want it to convey. So don't feel limited by the figures that you find. Like push yourself to, make your own figure, be original, and really do what you need to do for your presentation. And then this next slide shows a redrawn table. So these two tables are just like what you would see in Excel or Word. I mean, they're not bad, but compared to this redrawn table, you just see that it uses space better. Like it has less lines, it's less busy, it's just cleaner, it looks more professional. It's easier to read, which is the goal of your presentation. You want it to be clear and concise and easy to understand. So if you can take steps to help with the clarity of your presentation, then definitely go for it. Okay, these next slides show how an effect is used effectively, I think. So I think I have to present for this one. Okay, so you see these three peaks, they're fully separated. And now I use the transition to show that these two peaks are now convoluted together. And then I have another transition that when I explain it, I would say like, when someone was looking at this data, instead of seeing that there were three components or three peaks in this area, they would only see two. So just doing that like simple animation of what is happening like over time, I think it helped illustrate what I was trying to explain. So if you can find like simple ways to incorporate effects and animations, I think they work really, really well. An even simpler effect is something like just changing one word on a slide and keeping everything the same. So here I'm going from acknowledgements to questions at the very end of my presentation. It's just like super simple, but it does like tell the audience now that your presentation is over and like you're ready for questions. So just something simple. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about was format. So I'm sure you guys know this, but there are pretty much like two main like oral research presentation that have slideshows, formats that you can use, so PowerPoint and Google Slides. There are obviously others out there like Prezi and other ones, but I just found that these are the most user-friendly and most compatible with like the requirements that most conferences or presentations want you to have. So I would just stick to those. I did want to highlight like a few advantages to both of them. So with PowerPoint, I think the best feature they have is the presenter view. So when you're practicing your presentation um, and you go into presenter view, it'll show you a timer in real time, like it just automatically starts when you start talking. It'll also show you the next slide. So that kind of helps like when you're practicing and like memorizing your slides, like knowing what comes next and like what how much time you have left to talk about what you want to do. I think this works best when you have two screens because if you just have one screen, then you don't want the audience seeing the presenter view. But if you have two, then like you can have the presenter view on one screen and then like your actual presentation on your normal screen. And then there's also Google Slides, which I think is the best way to collaborate if you have a group project or a group presentation. That way everyone can collaborate in real time. Both of these formats have built-in templates. So like if you know you want a professional like design or layout, but you don't know where to start, I would start with those templates and change them and edit them to what you think looks best. Another like program that I have used in the past is SlidesGo. And that's just an online website that has so many presentation templates. And I think they look really elegant and they are adaptable to both PowerPoint and Google Slides. So you have the option to download either of them. And then lastly, I think PowerPoint has more tools for creating figures, like I mentioned. So if you are trying to recreate your figures, I would start with PowerPoint because it honestly has more features than you would think. And what I would do honestly is like copy and paste a figure that like you want to recreate or you want to do something similar, copy and paste it into PowerPoint, and then use the different tools like the shapes and the strokes and everything else in PowerPoint and kind of overlay all of your changes on top of that figure. That way you're not starting from scratch or like trying to look at proportions. So just look for things like that that will save you time and make it a little bit easier to redraw figures. Because you don't have to redraw everything. You just want to redraw the parts that you think are not necessary. Okay. Now I want to shift gears and talk more about the delivery of your presentation now that we've talked about like the content and what it should look like. So communication, I think, is a big point with your delivery of any research presentation. So like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to just read your presentation. Before you even like start practicing, think about what you want to communicate. Like what is your takeaway message that you want the audience to get from each slide? If a slide doesn't have a very clear purpose or a very clear takeaway message, then think about if it's even worth like keeping in your presentation. Maybe there's a way you can combine that information with another slide, or it's just not helping your overall message. So why waste your time on that slide? You can just get rid of it and focus on something else. So really think about that for sure, because you do have limited slides and limited time usually on presentations. And then another good thing you can do is ask a grad student or your PI or a professor to explain a technical concept or a slide if you don't know like how to explain it yourself. Like if you're working in a research lab and this is your first presentation and this is like your first time explaining these really complex concepts and things to people and you don't know where to start with someone who already knows the concept and knows how to explain it. Hear and like listen to how they explain it and see if you would be able to explain it like them or figure out another way to explain it. In my like personal experience, I found that analogies are really good ways to convey understanding of complex topics. I have an example on this next slide. So this example was showing how absorption profiles are similar to shadows, and that's kind of how spectroscopy works. Like an instrument will detect a structure's shadow, and that makes the absorption profile. So I thought like that was a good way for people who don't understand chemistry to like understand this concept, because everyone knows what a shadow is. So just look for ways like that that you can connect ideas to your topic. I remember a grad student in my lab once did an analogy with a puzzle, like how finding chemical identifications was like doing a puzzle. Like you have to find different pieces of the puzzle, or like different components and different characteristics of a chemical before you can get its identification and like quote unquote fill in or like do the puzzle. Yeah, so I think they work really well. So look for those if you can. And then practice, that is super important, because practice definitely goes hand in hand with your preparation. So if you're not prepared and have really practiced your presentation, then that will show in your delivery. So definitely take steps to prepare. And I suggest presenting to both a technical and a non-technical audience, so that you know how to explain concepts in a way that's understandable to both of those types of people. So like explain it to grad students who understand the technical side, and then also explain it to like your roommates who don't have any idea or don't understand what your topic is about. So if your roommates are able to understand what you're saying and your grad students, then like you've done the right thing, like you've explained everything super well. And with that, know your audience. Most times you can try to like figure out or narrow down what your audience is going to be and like who you need to cater to. So if it's at a conference, you would expect like, you know, people in your field know what you're talking about and know most of the jargon. But if you're presenting to like a class or people outside of your field, they're not going to really have an understanding of the technical terms. So make sure that you decide what kind of vocabulary you want to use that would be most effective to understanding your topic. So an example of that is when I give a presentation, I like decide, should I use the word analyte for everything or the word chemical? And this is a word I use a lot. So if I was maybe like giving a presentation to people in my field, I would use analyte because they like clearly understand what that means. But if I was presenting to people in a classroom setting who weren't in the chemistry department, I would just use the word chemical, because I think everyone understands what a chemical is, but not everyone knows what an analyte is. And then the last thing I want to say about practice is usually most people like memorize what they're going to say, because you don't want to have a ton of notes with you or like always looking down. You want to rehearse, you know, what you're going to say, and that just helps give you a better delivery of your presentation. And so a tip that works for me is I like to memorize, instead of memorizing the whole presentation or something, I just memorize the word or the phrase that I want to begin each slide with. So that way, if I know the word, I can kind of decide what I want to say after that for each slide. But then I can reset when I go to a new slide and like start new and know where I'm going to start, instead of like being lost on what I just said. And then another thing is timing. So most of these presentations are going to be timed. So it's really important that you stay within your time limit, especially if you're being judged or like it's a competition, then that does matter, because if you go over time, then you might be penalized. So you don't want that. A good like suggestion is to have 1 minute for each slide. Obviously that can vary, but that's a good place to start if you're having like a really hard time staying within your time limit. And that also helps you decide how many slides you need to have in your presentation. So if you have like a 12-minute presentation, starting out with maybe 12 slides is you could do that, and then see like if you only saying a few words for one slide, or you need more time on another slide, and then you can change things up accordingly. And then what I found is you always end up saying more words about something than you actually need. People are not very concise in, you know, everyday language. It's very hard to be concise. And so that's why practicing really matters, because I promise you, the first time you time yourself going through your presentation, it's going to take you way longer than your allotted time. Um, so recording yourself while you're practicing or timing yourself will be really helpful. So you can go back and see like, oh, I'm using a lot of filler words, or I'm explaining this in a really complicated way. Like maybe I should find a different way for explaining this. Okay, and then I have a few more things about delivery because I do think this is the most important part of a research presentation. So tone, that is really important, because when you're nervous, I think it's really easy to become monotone and have no inflection about what you're saying. Like it all just comes across as kind of boring. And that's not what you want, because if it's boring, then people are not going to listen to you, and you want people to listen to you. Um, so I know it's hard to work through that nervousness, but I think it does get better as you do more and like you get into your presentation. You might start out really nervous, but like push through it and force yourself to not be monotone, because that'll really help with people understanding your presentation and wanting to listen to you. Definitely try to project your passion and your excitement through your voice. Like that's going to resonate with people. People are going to be able to tell, like just through your inflection and your voice, that you care about what you're doing. Like you're excited about this and you want to share your research and your project with the people who are here. And that's going to help you overall. So definitely strive for that. And then try to be dynamic. And this is especially important over Zoom when it's hard to see gestures and body language. Like if we were in person, I would have more tips of like, you could do gestures, or you could walk around, you could pace, use your space. But over Zoom, you don't have space. You just have a screen, and all that people can see is what is in your screen, like your facial expressions and your voice. So it's important to still be dynamic and be passionate, even if it's over Zoom, because it still matters. Okay, funny story. Last semester, I actually had to give a semi like research oral presentation, and I was very unprepared. I would not recommend doing that, but I was making my presentation literally an hour before I had to give it. But it ended up being okay, because my professor in my evaluation, he was like, you have a very energetic presentation style. Like it's easy for people to listen to you. So honestly, the delivery matters way more than the content, I feel at times. I don't think that's always going to work for you, but I think more times than not, it will. So sometimes it doesn't matter what you're saying, but if you're communicating it effectively and clearly and concisely and energetically, like people are going to remember that. And I think that'll be conveyed in, your scores or your evaluation. So just remember that. And I have a paraphrase quote from Maya Angelou that I think kind of gets to what I'm saying. Like people won't remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So if people feel like they see your excitement or your passion about your project, like they're going to notice that a month later than, the chemistry stuff that you were trying to tell them. So just keep that in mind. Another tip I have is try to show ownership for your project. This is your presentation, you're the one giving it, so you should be the expert. More times than not, like the people listening to your presentation or judging your presentation are not going to be in your field. Like they're not going to know exactly what you know. They're not the experts usually. And so when you say things or you explain things, you are the expert. So you should be confident in explaining what you know, because you either did it or you read about it. So you know it better than anyone else. So just remember that and let that shine through, because that is going to help your credibility and make people like believe in you and believe that what you did was, logical and like good science. And when you're talking about things that you did, emphasize that it was you and not your grad student or your PI, if that is the case. Like if it's a project that, you led, you did a lot of like the labor on it, then emphasize that when you're either answering questions or in your presentation. Like usually this comes out more in the question phase of your presentation, but definitely say like, oh, when I was in lab, I did this, or I saw this, or when I was looking through the data, like I noticed this outlier. And it emphasizes that you were the one doing it, and it's not like someone else was doing it, and it's like you don't have ownership over your project. Obviously, like if you didn't do the project and you weren't doing like the work or the labor, that's perfectly fine. Like don't lie about it. But in the case that you did, like definitely highlight that, because I think people like that, especially with research like conferences and competitions. Like you're telling your research to people that are experts in your field, or like much older than you, like professors, scientists, grad students. And so as an undergraduate student, if you're able to show ownership for your work, like I think that really helps you stand out. Like you're doing some incredible work at a young age that, experts are doing in the field. So I just think it's really cool. And also, it's okay that you don't know the answer to everything. But instead of just saying, I don't know, try to connect it to something that you do know. So, an example of that is like, if you get asked a question that you really don't know about, you could say, I don't know, but my lab did a similar study like last year. Or I don't know, but we're working on a study that could answer that question in the future. Or I don't know, but based on what I know about this other related topic, I would say or guess this, something like that, so that you're not just saying, I don't know, and leaving it at that. You want to end on a positive note, on a good note that reflects well on you. So try to connect to something that you do know. Okay. And then the last thing I have about delivery is that, and this is just my experience from like going to conferences and like seeing other people like get judged on their presentations and like getting judged myself, is that most presentations are judged and graded on delivery more than anything else. Like judges and people listening are trying to see, are you an effective scientific communicator? Does the judge understand and get what your presentation was about because of you clearly and passionately explaining it? I think that matters way more than like what you actually did or like the science behind it. Because also, like usually when you're competing in a research competition, like not everyone is in your field. They might be in the general field of like chemistry or biology, but they're not in your niche of like particular research that you're doing. So you're competing against a variety of research projects. So it would be really hard to judge them all based on the science when the science isn't even the same. And so the only like common factor you guys all have is your delivery and how you're delivering your research presentation. So that's why I think it's really important to focus on that. Okay, and then just some reminders about delivery. I'm sure you guys all know this, but I just want to highlight them because I think it's easy to overlook them. So the first one is don't be afraid of silence. I know a lot of people feel like if you're not talking, like you're doing something wrong, or like people think you're messing up, or like you forgot what you're going to say. And I don't think that's true at all. A moment or two of silence like helps you gather your thoughts, and also just serves as a transition point between slides. Like if you're just talking nonstop from slide to slide, like there's no pause or like break where there should be, because naturally there's a break from slide to slide. So naturally you should also pause to kind of mirror that. So definitely pause and don't rush yourself, because it's easy to get rushed and just talk a lot. It's harder, I think, to not talk and just appreciate the silence. So don't be afraid of it. And then also consciously make an effort to avoid filler words. I just said, so when you start like noticing it, you'll notice that you do it a lot, but it really matters for research presentations because you have limited time, you have limited words that you can say in your time. So it really matters the words that you choose. So instead of saying, try to pause and think, because remember, silence is not bad. Silence will help you gather your thoughts and not say and say, another word that will help answer the question or whatever. And it's not just it's words like, so, and all of those kind of words. But as you're practicing and recording yourself, I think the recording really helps you catch all of those filler words. And I promise you, the first time you watch your recording, you're going to cringe. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, I say all these words so many times. It sucks, but it's okay. But just during your oral presentation, just try not to. And then, of course, breathe. Like I remember I still get nervous before every presentation I give. So if you just, take a few deep breaths and try not to think about your presentation right before you give it, I think it'll like slow down your heart rate and just get you centered. So just don't forget to breathe. And then also in the beginning of your presentation, don't forget to introduce yourself and smile. Like I said, over Zoom, your emotions and your facial expressions matter. So if you're, smiling and happy, enthusiastic, then that is going to stand out. And then don't forget to speak up. This is obviously really important when you're doing an in-person presentation, but it still matters over Zoom. Like you think because the microphone is picking you up, you don't have to talk as loud, but the volume, like you can still hear when someone is whispering versus like, talking with confidence and speaking up. So just keep that in mind because it still matters over Zoom. And then don't talk too fast or the audience can't keep up. I think that's self-explanatory. And then lastly, talk to the audience, not the screen. If you were in person, I'm sure you would be like looking around the room, making eye contact with people. And I think that still applies even if you're giving a presentation over Zoom. So what I like to do is try to put like the panel of people, that you see when you go into presenter modes, like on your screen somewhere where you can still make eye contact with the people listening to your presentation. Because like when I see people nodding or like smiling or like, I don't know, resonating with what I say, it makes me feel better and feel like I'm actually communicating effectively. So it does help. All right. And then the last part of this that I wanted to go over was just Zoom tips and like different ways to do presentations on Zoom that you might not have heard about before. So I'm just going to do some demonstrations and show you guys what it looks like. So I'm sure you all know about like the normal way to share your screen or have done it before, but there are actually a few different ways. So let me show you real quick. So there's actually a way that you can share a portion of your screen. And if you want to like follow the steps as I'm doing them, you can. I have like enabled share screen, but don't share your screen, but like you can look at the buttons as I talk about them. So if you go to share screen, it like defaults to the basic way of sharing your screen, but there's another tab called advanced. So if you hit that and then hit the thing that says portion of screen. So now you can only see a portion of my screen and I can move like this box that comes up to wherever I want it on the screen. And I can make it as big or as small as I want. And I think this is really helpful when you want notes or something around your screen, but when you go into presenter mode and like your presentation takes up your whole screen, you can't put your notes anywhere. So if you're just sharing like a part of your presentation or a part of your screen, you can resize your presentation obviously to like fit in that box, and then you can put your notes like everywhere around it so that first of all, like they're not showing to the audience, but you can still look at them. So that's one thing you can do. Another new thing that I found is if you go back to the advanced option, you can actually share your presentation as a virtual background. So let me show you what that looks like. Okay. So right now, my slideshow is actually my virtual background. You can resize yourself to like move wherever you want on your screen, and then your background also moves accordingly. This one is kind of strange, but the thing that really matters is at the bottom, there's this option that says split video from slides. So if you do that, then you're still able to see my slideshow. But the important thing is it doesn't take over your whole screen, like it didn't go into presenter mode. And it has this option at the bottom where you can move through your slides like through there. And this also helps because then you can still put notes like around your screen and still see them. Like I'm talking about virtual notes, not like actual sticky notes, but that works too, whatever you want. But you can put like those like computer sticky notes on your screen and still be able to see them without everything taking over your screen. Okay. I'm not sure if you have to have the update to do the like virtual background sharing. But yeah, if you have an older version, just update your Zoom account and you'll get all the features. Okay, let me go back to my presentation. Okay, so like last things, try to put your notes near your camera so that you're not looking down when you're giving your presentation, right? Like at the whole, like if you're trying to make eye contact or do something similar to eye contact because it's over Zoom, it helps if you're looking in the camera, and it helps like if you place your notes either near the camera or like if you prefer to look at the people, like the tile of people in presenter mode, you can put them near the camera. But let me just show you, like if you can move your tile of people around. So if you put them at the very bottom of the screen, now you see how my eyes, like I'm looking down. That doesn't really help because I'm not really looking at the audience or making eye contact. And then also like you can put the people on the side of your screen, which still doesn't help because you're always like looking to the side or like moving your head to look at your slides and then the people. So just try to keep it like near the top, near your camera, so that it looks like you're actually looking at people. And then last thing is to use your mouse or a laser pointer feature on your slides so that you can keep your audience engaged. When you're in person, like you can easily point to things or like walk up to the screen and touch it, but with Zoom, you can't do that. And I think people also get distracted, or like it's easier to get distracted on Zoom. So if you can do things like draw their attention with your mouse or a laser pointer to like a specific figure or point, then it's going to be like, oh, I should be listening, or now she's talking about this, so like let me get back into the presentation. And PowerPoint and Google Slides have those features. So just be intentional about using them. And honestly, that is it for my presentation. Here are some of the resources that I mentioned if you're interested in them. SlidesGo and Inkscape are both free. I think Procreate is free, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, that is everything. Now, like if you guys have questions, I am more than welcome to answer them. So just let me know. Well, if you have questions in the future, you're welcome to email me, and I'd be happy to work with you. But I will go ahead and put the attendance form in the chat. If you want to stick around and ask me a question, you can, or you're more than welcome to go. Thank you guys again for coming, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.